Hi, I'm Scott and welcome to my shop. In today's video, we're going to mix up some resin and cast it without using a pressure pot. And yes, it's going to be bubble free. Then we're going to take that casting and cut it up into blanks so I can turn a handle, well actually this handle, for a bottle opener. So keep watching. In this segment, we're going to talk about creating a turning blank for our project. Right? And to do that, we're going to use epoxy resin, okay? And the specific resin that we're using for this project is Alumilite Corporation's amazing deep pour epoxy. This is some really good stuff. It'll allow you to pour up to 2 inches deep. Okay, it's specifically made to release the bubbles that we'll encounter when you're stirring, mixing, casting. The pros of this resin: minimal equipment needed, right? You're just going to need like a mixing cup and then a mold to pour the stuff into. You won't need a pressure pot, okay? You won't need any type of vacuum chamber for degassing, right? So you just need something to put it in and some space to put it down and let it sit for a long time, because there's the con, right? It has a really, really long demolding time for resin and an even longer full cure time. Demolding time is 24 to 72 hours. Okay, so you got to leave it in the mold for that long. And full cure is 5 to 7 days. Okay, so it is a little bit of a takeaway. There's some other resins out there that are much quicker, but they require some additional equipment that you might not have. So this is just the foot in the door to some resin turning, something that anybody can do in the shop with with minimal equipment. So let's talk about the materials that we're going to have to get together to make our blank. Okay, so the materials that we're going to need, right? We're going to need a part A and part B of our resin, and we'll talk more about the mixing ratio for this later. Okay. Also going to need some way of coloring the resin, unless you just want a clear blank. Okay. So what we're going to use, or what I'm going to use, is a combination of some mica powders, okay, and some Alumilite dye. You're going to need a mold, okay, some type of mold. All right. You can make your own. You can buy one. This one's bought. This is made out of the HDPE, or the high density polyethylene. Okay. And I have these made for me by a place called P-Town Subby. I guess we can put a link for that somewhere in the description of the video. If you want to buy one, if you want to make one, you can make your mold out of anything. Just a regular mixing cup can be a mold. These smaller mixing cups, wow, that would have been great if I would have had one really handy. Smaller mixing cups make great molds if you want to like cast things for like bottle stoppers. Okay. So you can pretty much use anything. I've used cardboard. Some people use foam core board. You can use whatever, as long as it'll hold the resin and it won't leak. Okay. There's some tricks around doing that if you're going to make your own molds, but we can talk about that some other time. Okay. But for now, we're going to be using a mold that I bought. You're also going to need a mixing cup. Okay. You need something to mix up the resin in. I would recommend getting one of these disposable graduated cups. It's got all kinds of markings on here for, properly mixing up the resin. But I would get more than one. You're going to see we're going to use 2 today. One's going to be for the main color and one's going to be for a secondary color. And so, obviously you can't mix them all in the same cup. So you're going to need multiple cups. All right. You're also going to need some mixing sticks, right? And these are just tongue depressors that I use. Okay, I bought some non-sterile tongue depressors off of Amazon. I think it's like basically I bought a lifetime supply for $10, right? At least I don't think I'm going to go through them anytime soon. So, and they're relatively cheap, obviously, and they'll last you forever. So you're going to need them, okay? And that's kind of like really the materials you're going to need to be able to make the blank. So now that we got all our materials together, let's talk about safety. When you're mixing resin, you're dealing with chemicals, so you're really going to have to, consider, safety and safety equipment, right? So the most important thing that you can do for your safety is to read the directions, okay? Not only is that going to give you the right mix ratio, but it's also going to give you any cautionary warnings that you're going to need to know about the resin that you're using, right? Each manufacturer should be able to provide you with some type of data sheet or technical data sheet or safety data sheet that you can read, so you can read about all the problems, possible problems in using that resin, and any, type of PPE equipment that you would need to handle their resin, okay? So it's really important to read the directions, read the material safety spec sheets. You definitely want to know all the safety warnings, all the mix ratio information, and if you're going to be using your project that's going to be in contact with food, you're going to want to make sure that somewhere in that in those technical specs it says it's safe for food contact, right? So the resin we're using today is safe for food contact, but there's a caveat, right? It specifically says it's safe for food contact if it's mixed in the proper amounts for the proper amount of time and let to fully cure, right? So, I'm sure they're just, doing what they have to do to make sure that, you're as safe as possible. They cover themselves legally, right? So just make sure you follow the directions, very important. Okay, so enough on the whole safety tech sheets. I think I beat that to death. Next thing you're definitely going to want to use, right, is some gloves, right? So I just got some nitrile gloves. I'm going to be wearing them when I'm mixing up the resin, okay? Glasses, right? Not only do I need these to see, they're bifocal safety glasses, okay? When I'm doing anything up close. It's also going to keep any resin that splashes when I'm mixing. It's going to keep it out of my eye. Now, that doesn't really splash all that much when you're mixing resin. It doesn't, but God forbid it does. You definitely don't want to get any of this stuff in your eye, right? That'd just be a nightmare, all right? So safety glasses, definitely a must. You're definitely going to want to protect yourself and your clothing with something that you don't mind if it gets resin on it, right? I think that's pretty much a given. You don't want to wear any good clothes, right? I'm obviously just wearing my wood turner smock, so if I get resin on it, so be it, right? But then you got to consider, how much exposure do you want? Are you going to wear long sleeves or not? I am not going to wear long sleeves. I do not have a sensitivity to this resin. I've used it before, but some people do, right? They might want to cover, all your exposed skin. It's just something that you're going to have to figure out on your own, right? The other thing that you might want to wear is a respirator, right? Once again, go back, read the manufacturer safety warnings, see if you need to wear a respirator, right? You got to check the ventilation in your shop. Do you have doors open? Do you have windows open? It's all those considerations that you're really going to have to pay attention to safely use the resin. And we're just talking right now just about the mixing, right? You're definitely going to want to wear a respirator when you're turning, right? When you're sanding, all that kind of stuff is very important. You don't want to get, little bits of, sanding dust that's plastic into your lungs, right? So just be safe, right? Read the directions, follow the warnings, and you should be fine. All right, so the next step is we have to figure out how much resin are we going to need to fill this mold, okay? So there's a couple ways to do that, and I'm going to use what's a pretty simple method, and I'm actually going to be using crushed walnut shells because I have some, right? But a lot of people use rice, and it's very commonly available. It's relatively inexpensive, right? If you have some in your shop, great. You just take a cup, okay? And we're going to take, I'm going to be using the crushed walnut, but you take a cup and you start dumping that stuff into your mold, okay? So let's take care of that and do that right now. Here you can see I have some crushed walnut shells, right? I already have a cup in here, right? And so I'm just going to take these and dump this in here until I fill it up, right? Level it off, all right? Get that mostly full. Okay, so you can see this is mostly full, okay? And now I'm just going to take a larger cup and I'm going to dump all this stuff into the larger cup, all right? So I'm going to use my notes as a funnel so I don't make a mess, And I'm still going to make a mess, but I'm going to do the best I can. All right. All right, let me put my notes back. All right. So now we know how much of that, well, for me, crushed walnut shells fit into this mold, and I'll be able to check on here, right? So I'm checking up here, and it says that it's about 16 ounces by volume, okay? Let me see if I can get that on there. See that on there? I got this set to focus on me, but maybe you can see there, right? 16 ounces-ish, right? So 16 ounces, right? So what we're going to do, since this resin mixes 2 to 1, all right, I'm going to bump that up, and just so I make sure that I have plenty of resin to fill up the mold, I'm going to bump that up to 18. This resin mixes 2 to 1, right? So to get to 18, I'm going to need 12, okay, and 6, okay? So I'm going to have 12 ounces of one part and 6 ounces of a different part, and that'll get me to 18. Right? Okay, so off camera, what I did was I went over to my compressor and I blew out the mixing cup so it's nice and clean. Okay, I also blew out the mold so we're nice and clean. You don't want to get any of that, you know, dust from the stuff we use to measure the volume. We don't crushed walnut shells, right? You don't want to get any of that dust into the resin itself. I mean, not that it would be a problem, but we just want resin, right? So, okay, so the next thing is we're going to do is we're actually going to mix the resin. Okay, so I kind of mentioned it earlier, right? You're definitely going to want to follow the manufacturer's instructions. Some resins mix 1 to 1. This one happens to mix 2 to 1, right? Some of them mix by volume. Some of them mix by weight. Right? If it's a resin that mixes by weight, you're going to need a scale so you can weigh each component, right? You really got to follow the directions on your resin. Okay, we're getting ready to mix this up. So step 1, right? Step 1, we're going to put on some gloves. Okay, gloves, right? I'm going to need a mixing stick. And like I said, I'm just using a tongue depressor, all right? So now it's time to pour the resin in, right? So we need 18 ounces of resin, right? 18 is an easy number, right? I mean, it divides easily by 3, so, right? So we're going to need 12 ounces of part A and 6 ounces of part B, okay? So I'm going to get over here, I'm going to pour this in the cup, and hopefully you'll be able to see it on the close-up because I'm going to be out of the shot, and I want to protect my eyes, right? So let's pour this in until we hit 12. Okay, so I'm standing back up, right? So I'm just wiping off the resin bottle with a paper towel so it just doesn't make a giant mess. All right, I'll put the lid back on that. Okay, and then now time to do the part B, right? And we're going to have to do 6 ounces of part B. Okay, a different piece of paper towel, right? We're going to clean off the top of that. All right, so I'm in no big rush here, right? No big rush. This resin has a open time or working time, right? 60 to 90 minutes, right? So no big rush, right? Now something like Alumilite clear or Alumilite clear slow, which is what most people think of when they talk about Alumilite, right? Yeah, working time, 7 to 12 minutes, depending on which one of those versions you use, right? So not a lot of time, right? So you really, really got to rush with that stuff. Here, take your time, right? So I'm going to take the stirring stick, okay? And you're going to see here, I'm just going to start mixing this up. All right, and it says in the directions to mix this for 5 minutes. Okay, so I'm not going to sit here and talk to you for 5 minutes because I'd run out of things to talk about when it comes to mixing. All right, a couple things you do need to know. All right, while you're mixing this, it's going to look like there's swirls because the part A and the part B have different viscosities. Okay, you want to mix this at least for 5 minutes. All right, You also want to make sure that there's no more swirls, right? All the swirl marks are gone, okay? Or striations, or whatever you want to call it. You definitely want to sit here and scrape the side of the mixing cup, all right? You definitely want to scrape the sides. You want to make sure all the resin is mixed, all right? And you can see I'm rotating the cup as I'm scraping the side, okay? Very important. All right, and also depending on the type of mixing cup you have, mine has like a little bit of a channel that's on the edge, right? And that's not really ideal, but I have these, so I'm using them up. All right, so the bottom of my tongue depressor has got a little bit of a rounded edge on it. All right, if the mixing cup was totally flat along the bottom, so for me to be able to get into that little corner, I would have to square off the end of the tongue depressor. Okay. So you really got to kind of consider the type of mixing cup that you have, all right, and whether or not you're going to be able to get into all the corners, be able to scrape all the sides. You definitely don't want anything with ridges, okay? So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to keep mixing, all right, and we'll come back when we're ready for the next step. Okay, thanks to the magic of video editing, you didn't have to sit there and watch 5 minutes of me mixing, right? So, but the mixing's all done, okay? Mixed it up for 5 minutes. I'm going to separate this resin and put a third of it into a separate cup. And you might be wondering, it's like, well, why didn't you just, you know, put 6 ounces in this cup, okay? And then put the 12, and then mix up 12 ounces in the larger cup, right? Well, it's just better if you mix it all together at once, right? I mean, the larger volume, the less chance you have of making an error with the proportions, okay? You know, like 1 drop out of a gallon is a whole lot less of a problem than 1 drop out of a very small, you know, like maybe like a shot glass, right? I mean, that proportion is going to get thrown off. So you mix it all together in 1 cup, and then you can separate it into separate cups later. Okay, I mix for 5 minutes. If you don't feel comfortable or you're not sure, mix it longer. I mean, you have at least an hour of working time with this resin, which is way more than you're going to need. So always err on the side of caution, right? Better safe than sorry. If when in doubt, mix it longer. Okay, to get to 5 minutes, I set a timer on my phone. I've done this a bunch of times before, so 5 minutes, good enough for me. And we're still going to mix some more anyway. So here you can see I have my secondary mixing cup, or what we'll do is let me zoom out a little bit here. And that's good enough, right? I mean, you can see that, right? So my secondary mixing cup, okay? Let me grab a Sharpie real quick. Okay, I real quick just ran and grabbed a Sharpie, and then you can see here on the zoom in, right? And I didn't draw a really straight line, but you can see on the zoom in, all I did was I just kind of darkened up the line that says 6 ounces, okay? And that's what I want to put in this cup. I just want to put 6 ounces in, right? So I'm just going to take some of this resin and just pour it into this other cup and hopefully not make a huge mess. All right, and that line's making it real easy for me to see. And does it have to be exactly? No. The reason I'm pouring it into another cup is because I'm going to use 2 different colors, okay? I'm going to use a blue and a pearl. Let me clean up the table here just a little bit. I'm just wiping this all up with some paper towel, all right? So I'm going to use a blue and a pearl for our project, okay? And the blue is going to be the majority, right? So I separate them so I can mix the blue in the blue cup, and I can mix the pearl in the pearl cup, and that way, and then we can mix them all together in the mold when we're done. It's time to add the color, right? So let's start with the blue, all right? And I want the blue to be fairly opaque, okay? So I'm going to use a little bit of dye, and when I say a little, I actually mean a little, right? You're going to see, like, I'm going to put 1 drop of this dye, and this stuff's pretty thick, and it should drip anytime. Come on, dye. Making a liar out of me, right? Okay, 1 drop, right? Actually, there's a little bit more just hanging off of there, and I don't want to waste that. So let me grab another stick, one that's clean. I'll just wipe that on that stick so I can use that. All right. All right, and now I have a dilemma, right? So now I have a stick I'm not going to use, and I got to get rid of that. So I'm just going to put it in another cup and push that aside, and I'm going to stir up with this stick, all right? And you're going to see, right, that one drop of blue dye, okay, I mean, that really kind of kicked in, and it really turned that blue, right, in a nice dark blue. All right, so just mix that up a little bit until I got an even color, okay? Now the issue is that going to be good enough? I mean, it's really hard for me to say, right? It really kind of depends on the project, all right? So depending on your project and what else you're going to add, all right, will dictate whether or not that's enough dye, right? What you don't want to do is you don't want to create like a pen blank, okay? You don't want to create something like a pen blank, and then as you're, getting the piece smaller, smaller, thinner, thinner, narrower, narrower, right? You don't want to be able to see the brass tube through the blank, right? So you got to make sure that you use enough color to hide what you want to hide, right? So this is going to be a handle. We're going to use a brass insert. It's going to be maybe about 1/4 inch all the way around that brass insert. So there's going to be plenty of resin. I can kind of still see through this, right? So I might put a little bit more dye in, but before I do that, I'm going to throw some mica powder in there and just check, because the mica powder might be enough to darken it up, okay? So I'm going to be using this cobalt blue, right? We'll put it down here, cobalt blue mica powder. That's from Black Diamond Pigments, all right? Now, it says you can use up to 5% of, color to the resin. Well, that's a lot, right? So, I mean, I know we didn't use 20 ounces. I mean, we used 18, but, 5% of 20 ounces is an ounce, right? And this entire thing of mica powder, I know this is a different color, but this entire thing of mica powder is 1.2 ounces, right? So we're never going to use that much, okay? But that, there's got to be the little caution, right? Don't use too much mica powder, all right? So the mica powder is going to give it some shimmer, some sheen. It's going to give it that little, like a pearlescent type effect, okay? So instead of just having a straight color, you'll have something with a little bit of glow to it, right? So you can see there on that camera, hopefully you can see, right? You got a little bit of a, I got to make sure I don't dump it out, right? You got a little bit of a glow to it instead of it just being straight pigment, okay? Going to mix that up. Actually going to throw a little bit more in there, right? And I'm just kind of doing this by eye, right? Some people will write down, formulas so they can reproduce their projects. And that's great. I mean, if that's what you want to do, right? They'll basically make it, what works and what doesn't work, right? I've done this blue and pearl enough times to know that this should work without a problem. All right, so I'm just going to mix this up, and that's looking pretty good. So now I got that camera adjusted just a little bit, right? And you can see what I'm doing is I'm pulling this stick out, right? And I'm looking here, and if I'm pulling the stick out and I can't see the wood through the resin, then I know that's going to be opaque enough for my project, okay? Now, if I can still see the wood through there, then it depends on how thick the project's going to be, right? If it's going to be thin, like a, potentially a pen blank, you definitely would want to add more, but I'm good here. That's good. So I'll leave that as it is. Here, let me recap this dye, and let me put the lid back in on this mica powder. It'd be a disaster to have that all over the shop. All right, and let's put this aside. Okay, so now we're going to do the pearl. Okay, so the pearl I'm going to use, this is from a different company. This pearl, wow. There you go. So this pearl resin, or not resin, this pearl mica is from Stardust Micas. The other one was Black Diamond, right? So, but I love this pearl. This is great. And I'm just going to use the same stick that I used before to scoop the resin, or to scoop the mica powder out. I'm just going to use the other side, right? And I'm just going to put a bunch in there. All right. And then take a new tongue depressor and just mix that in. And this is going to give a nice white pearly look to the resin. Okay. The combination with the blue and then the little white pearly swirls in it, it seems to be very popular, at least, you know, for the people that I deal with. So here we go. We got this all mixed in. We're mostly mixed in. I'm just going to take another couple turns with it. And you see, I'm not really mixing super fast. I don't want to introduce any more air into the resin than I have to. Okay? Just mix in nice and even, not too vigorous. Okay? Okay, and that should be good enough. All right? So just going to scrape that off. Going to get rid of that stick. We're going to get rid of that stick. I'm going to put the lid back on this pearl. All right. Now that's done. All right. So we got both our two components here, right? We got the blue. Here, let's get that. And we got the pearl. All right. We got them both ready to go. All right. So the next step would be to put them in the mold. So I got the two different colors, right? And all I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the blue. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start with the blue, and I'm just going to pour some in. All right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of just swirl in a little bit of the pearl, and then put some blue, overlap them a little bit. Okay, and then I have the mold mostly filled up, right? So I'm just going to let this drip so I get most of it out of here. All right, and then I'm going to let this one just let that run off. Okay, all right, those are done, right? I got just a broken piece of tongue depressor, right? I just snapped an end of it off, okay? And you can see I have this like randomly mixed in here, okay? So, but what I want to do is I'm going to create a little bit of like a swirl pattern, right? So I'm just going to take the stick and I'm just going to really easy just start swirling. Okay, not too much or they're just going to mix together, okay? So just do something that kind of looks cool. Right? And then once you get to where, you know, it's good, I mean, just a few swirls, you're done, right? So the next step now would be to just put this thing aside and let it cure. All right? So to be able to put this thing aside and let it cure, there's a couple things you're going to have to do, right? First, I'm going to have to find a place in my shop where it can sit, right? It's going to literally have to sit for 7 days. I know it says 5 to 7 days. I always go the maximum amount because that way I know for sure it is fully cured, right? You're also going to have to cover it, right? I mean, it's in your shop, right? Unless you have another room or something, or a dust-free environment somewhere, you're going to have to cover the mold with something. Or you can use a piece of paper, a piece of cardboard. As long as it's clean, it's not going to drop any debris into your casting, right? That's what you're going for. So it's got to be out of the way, covered. No one can bump it, right? You got to leave it alone, right? And you just got to let time do its thing, right? So with time, all the air bubbles will rise to the surface, and we're going to turn them all away anyway, right? If you wanted a totally clean casting, right, where the surface was totally smooth, you could take a blowtorch and you could pop the bubbles. You know, you have well, at least an hour to an hour and a half of working time, right? And then full cure, at least a day, right? I'm sorry, for demolding, at least a day. So during that time, you know, you got several hours that you could actually kind of, you know, do some stuff with this, right? You could kind of fix the swirls. You don't want to overdo the swirls. It'll just start to mishmash together, right? I mean, I might have even overdone it a little bit, right? So, during the explanation. So normally it's just, you know, like, you know, one or two quick passes through just to give it a little bit of a pattern. So, but everyone's going to be a little bit different, right? So that's this part of the process, right? We got the blank or the resin poured in the mold for the blank. And once this is fully cured, we'll be able to throw it on the lathe and turn it. All right, so we'll come back in a week, right? And you know, video, right? So it'll be like a couple seconds from now. But for me, come back in a week, right? We're gonna take this out of the mold, okay? And we're going to throw it on the lathe. So here we are back. It's a week later. Here, take a look at the blank, right? You got this nice like pillow looking effect. There's convection currents that happen while this thing's curing, you know, because of the heat generated during the cure process. So regardless of how you swirl it all around, it may not come out exactly how you were expecting. So, you know, unless you pretty much sit on it the whole time, you know, and keep putting those swirls in. I guess you could do that as it's starting to cure, but I've never done that. So, also, if you take a look at the blank, I don't know how well it's going to come out on the video, but you can see, you know, maybe like a couple areas here where there's some surface bubbles, right? Now we could have torched them off using a propane torch, and then there would have been, you know, no surface bubbles. But when we cut into it, you should see that the casting, except for that little bit on the surface, the rest of it should be bubble free. All right, so the next step here really is to just take this out of the mold. So I like these P-Town subby molds. I use them over and over again. They're made out of the HDPE plastic, right? Now it's a high density, yeah, I can speak. High density polyethylene, right? And the way these are held together are with some screws. So we're just going to take the screw gun, right, and just pop those screws out real quick. Okay, so there are some other commercially available molds that you'll be able to find. I guess a very popular one is called lizard blanks. And here, let me grab one real quick and I'll show you what they look like. Okay, so if we look down here, right, here's a lizard blank mold, and it's very similar. It's made out of HDPE, right? And you can see it's held together with some wing nuts, right, instead of just using screws for screw guns. So this will make it so you don't need any tools to take that apart. Now the downside is it's only one side, right? So you'll be able to pull this one side off, and then you're going to have to pry your blank out of your, you know, lizard blank mold. Okay, I don't like these as much as I like the ones from P-Town Subby, and you know, it just depends on whether or not, or how often you're going to be using a mold, right? You don't need any of these; you can just make your own. Okay, all right, enough about that. All right, so how are we going to get this out of here, right? I'm going to use a little piece of hardwood, and let me go grab a mallet. All right, so here you can see I got a mallet. Okay, and all I'm just going to do is just tap this to get this out. Here, let me move the screwdriver out of the way. All right, so I tapped them and I got that broken free. I should be able to just pull this apart. All right, there's one side off. And there's the other side off. Okay, and then so here's our blank. All right, so now I'm just going to try to knock these sides free just to loosen it up a little bit. You just got to give it a nice sharp strike. All right, so now it's loosened up from the sides, and I should be able to just tap that out. All right, let me move the mold out of the way and get the screws out, right? And so here's our blank, all right? And you can look on the bottom, right? Here's what the bottom's going to look like, right? You can see we got no air bubbles here. We got no air bubbles on any of the sides, right? So it looks like that amazing deep pour epoxy did its job. But we'll know for sure when we cut this up into blanks, and to do that, we're going to take it over to the bandsaw. Okay, so here I am over at the bandsaw, and my shop's kind of small, so I had to move some stuff around to get the bandsaw out. So we got our blank. It's about 5.5 inches long by 4, right? I want to cut this in even pieces, so I'm going to cut it into 4 pieces, and about, what, 1 3/8 inches each should give me about 4 even slices out of this. I'm going to true it up on the side so I have a square piece, and then we'll have 4 blanks ready to go. All right, let's fire this up. Let's get this going. So here I am over at the lathe. You can see I have one of our blanks mounted in the chuck. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is drill a hole in the end to take this little brass bushing, okay? And I know it's kind of hard to see, so I'll put a blow up of that, okay? So the brass bushing is going to get glued in the end of the blank, okay? And that's going to give us not only a way of attaching our bottle opener hardware, it's also going to give us a manner of holding it on the lathe with the mandrel, okay? You could just thread the plastic, but you know, how strong's plastic when you're turning, right? I mean, I wouldn't want to have that snap off or break away. So, yeah, I'm going to glue this brass insert in. I'm going to use some 5-minute epoxy. So let me go grab a drill chuck, Forstner bit, and get that hole drilled. All right, so here you can see I got my drill chuck in. I got my Forstner bits, a 1/2 inch Forstner bit. That's the size I need for this little brass bushing that we're going to be using. And I have a mark on my Forstner bit. I don't know if you can see it on the video very well, but I got a Sharpie mark on there. That's going to be my depth stop. And time to fire up the lathe. I got the speed turned down. And we're going to just drill a hole. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this brass insert. I just screw it on the end of the hardware just so I can test fit it, right? And I want to make sure it sits below the surface. All right, and you can see that sits below the surface just by a little bit. All right, so now I can remove that. And we're going to take the blank out of the chuck and go back over to the table saw because it's a comfort height for me, and we're going to glue that brass insert into the hole. So here I am back over at the bandsaw, and I'm just using the bandsaw table because it's a nice comfortable height for me, okay? And you can see I got some 5-minute epoxy, I got my hardware, and I got my blank, right? So we're going to squeeze out equal parts of the epoxy and get it all mixed up. All right, here I got the epoxy all mixed up, and I'm just using the tongue depressor that I just kind of snapped in half. And the first thing I want to do is take some of this epoxy, and I'm going to just put it inside the walls of this hole. All right, just going to make sure I coat the walls nice. Just going to mush it around in there. Okay, now that I got that done, I'm going to put the insert onto the hardware, and I'm going to fill in this knurling just a little bit, maybe just the lower half. It'll definitely squeeze out to the upper half. I don't want to use too much, and then I'll have to deal with cleanup that I don't want to have to deal with. All right, so I have that on there. I have some in here, and I'm just going to insert that in. Unscrew this real careful and pull that straight out because I don't want to get any epoxy onto the threads. Okay. All right, and you can see I got a little bit of epoxy running out over there. I'm just going to grab a paper towel and clean that up. All right, here you can see I wiped off the excess with a paper towel, and now I just got to put this aside and just let it sit. This epoxy takes an hour to fully cure, so once it's fully cured, I'll be able to throw it up on the lathe and shape the handle. Okay, just a couple things before we get going. If there's a little bit, if you get a little bit of epoxy inside these threads, it's not a big deal. I have a tap that is the same size as this threaded insert. So I'll just run that tap in and out a few times. A lot of the mandrels that you can buy are self-tapping, so it'll do the same thing. Just using a tap is just quicker. And you know why I use this pad of paper for mixing my epoxy is that way I can just tear off the top sheet and have a fresh surface for the next time. So I know we said we're going to wait about an hour for this epoxy on this insert to cure, and it's been several days. I mean, it is what it is, right? So we're back here in the shop at the lathe. You see I got the blank here in the chuck. I apologize if there's some wind noise or traffic noise. The camera is right next to my open shop door, so it's just a beautiful day. So and it gives me some good ventilation. So the next thing that we're going to do here is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my spindle gouge, okay, and I'm going to cut the blank, all right, tapered down from the edge down towards the insert, okay, so make a little bit of a concave cut, all right, and that'll become a little bit more evident, the reason why I'm doing that a little bit later, but basically it'll make sure that the hardware sits dead flat on the end of the blank once it's done being shaped. Okay, so let me put my face shield on and we'll get to work. All right, let me get this face shield off. All right, so let me switch the camera angle here. So now you can see, right? You can see here I got a little bit of a concave cut, and so when I screw the hardware in, the edge of the hardware will have to seat dead flat, okay, on that concave, okay? All right, so the next step is to get this mounted on our mandrel, and the mandrel I'm going to be using is called a universal mandrel from Stainless Bottle Stoppers. All right, so I got the chuck off the lathe and I put on the universal mandrel, and you can see from the on this other angle, this is what the universal mandrel looks like. It's just a bottle stopper mandrel that's made by Stainless Bottle Stoppers, and it comes with this bushing kit. Okay, so much like turning pens, the mandrel itself comes with different size bushings, and this one is the size for the bottle opener. The size that it comes with no bushing is sized for Stainless Bottle Stoppers honey dipper. Okay, this is for bottle stoppers and for the bottle opener, and you can see it just slides on there, and then it gives you like a reference to turn to. Okay, and if you buy the kit, right, you can see there's a bunch of different size bushings, okay, and they're all for different projects. Okay, a lot of them are for other manufacturers like ice cream scoops or pizza cutters, or you know, different type projects that you would just be turning a handle for. So it's kind of cool, and that way you don't have to buy a whole bunch of different mandrels. But obviously this, we're going to be doing the bottle opener, so I'm going to put the bushing on and then the little corresponding nylon washer. I'm just going to thread that on real quick. Kind of holds the bushing in place and also gives you a reference so we're not digging into the bushing itself. Okay, so here we're going to mount the blank. Just tighten that up. All right, so that's nice and tight, and I'm going to bring the tailstock up to give it some support, and then we're going to round up this blank. Okay, here you can see I brought the tailstock in, and I'm using a live center, and I removed the little center point. That way it'll just leave a ring mark, okay, on the outside of the blank right? So it'll still give it some stability. It'll only leave a little bit of a ring mark, so that'll be easy to remove later. Whereas if I used a point, it would have dug into the resin and I would have had to take more resin off, okay? Just to get rid of that, the mark from the live center. So I'll lock down my tailstock, okay? And now I'm going to support the end of the blank so I can round it up, okay? Get it all nice and trued up, and then I can give it some shape. But before you do any resin turning, you're definitely going to want to wear some type of respirator, right? There's a lot of dust that comes off of this while you're turning it, and it's plastic dust, and you really don't want to be breathing that in, right? I mean, you know, at least I don't want to. So, so I'm going to wear a respirator. The respirator I'm wearing is a 3M VersaFlow. I turn a lot of resin, so I got, you know, what I figured was probably the best protection I could get for a respirator. Right. Prior to that, I was just using a regular 3M respirator. I'll throw up a picture of that so you can see what I was using before, and that was working great. It's just, you know, with the VersaFlow, there's a constant flow of air, so it keeps me nice and cool. So it's just a comfort thing, right? And since I justified it because I turn a lot of resin. So anyway, let's get the lathe turning, and we'll get this blank. We'll give it some shape. It's just a bottle opener, so I'm going to give it a real simple shape. It's not going to take too long. I won't be able to talk once I got the respirator on. So if I need to explain anything, sorry about the voiceover, but that's what it's going to be. Otherwise, there might be some music playing. So, yeah, just sit back and watch the video. All right, so I thought I'd take an opportunity to show you the different tools you can use while you're cutting through resin. All right, and this first one up is a carbide tool from Easy Wood Tools, and it has a negative rake cutter installed on it. All right, so you can see how that cuts through the resin. See the surface it leaves. All right, I'm going to take the compressor and blow that out. All right, and the next up is going to be just a regular old negative rake round nose scraper, high-speed steel tool. Now, I'm not pushing any of these tools. I'm going to let you decide based on the test here which one you might think works best for you. All right, so here we go with the high-speed steel tool, and we're going to get rid of that resin. All right, I'm going to stop the lathe and we're going to take a look, okay? So here we go. First one up is the Easy Wood Tools tool. And the next one is going to be the skew I've been using, and then the round nose scraper. Okay, so here you go. There's a comparison. Okay, here you can see I gave the handle just a very basic shape. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sand this down. I could hook up my sanding equipment, and I'm just going to run through the grits up to about 400 grit, and we'll come back once I'm done with the sanding. Okay, so here we are. I got my lathe cleaned up, and I got my universal mandrel off the lathe, and you can see here we have our blank all nice and polished up. Okay, so now the only step left is to take the hardware, and we're just going to screw the hardware onto the handle, and you can see that that end matches right up with the size of that opener. So there you go. We got a nice bottle opener. It's a quick, fast, fun, easy project. They make great gifts for people. You know, so I hope I took some of the mystery away at turning resin. So it's really not much different than turning wood. All right. So yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, you know, feel free to type them into the chat, and you know, I'll be here to answer any questions that you have. So yeah, thanks for watching.